Hello everybody, you're listening to The Arch on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rhylight Zone for a short story and or some poetry. And we catch up with Twangling Jack over in the York Shed for a weekly album review. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. And we are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcast. Please do leave us a short review on your podcast platform of choice. As always, you can find us on Facebook if you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound. And you can reach out to me here at the studio on dane.cobain at wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain at wickhamsound.org.uk. I'm particularly keen to hear from poets, performers, musicians, people with MP3s they might like to share, people with local arts news for our announcements sections, people who might like to be a guest on the show. Don't hesitate to get in touch. So this week we have a catch-up special. We are going to be catching up with jazz musician Betty Accorsi and graphic novelist Mark Armstrong Allard. But before we do that, it's time to check out this week's announcements.
Okay, so from Squidface Girl we have, "Hi Dane, hope this email finds you fit and well. I'm 2 months into my tour of India and return to the UK at the end of May, heading north to Rishikesh to a wellness retreat on Thursday and remaining optimistic about improving my health and well-being. I completed my CD in December just before leaving, and an alarmingly big box full of them has now arrived at my home address. Alarming because I'm probably going to still have a half-full, half-empty box of my CDs under the staircase for a very long time. However, the feeling of accomplishment and pride at having achieved my goal of finishing it all in time and saying it, then actually doing it, is immense and immeasurable. Lack of technical knowledge and my constant struggle to navigate it regardlessly as best as I can, coupled with a fan base barely reaching triple figures and comprising mainly of my friends and family, does limit my reach somewhat for sure, and this is where I was rather hoping you might be able to support me sometime soon on your radio show. Please could you play the first song I'm releasing on all major platforms using DistroKid distribution and Bandcamp, with the handle of course of Squidface Girl. It is called Spirit, and between you and me, I wrote it the day after my dog Lily passed away. It's quite a moving song to me as it conjures up her image in my mind whenever I hear it. I hope that my song might also have a similar effect on others who are suffering a bereavement or a struggle with loss. If it is also possible, please could you encourage listeners to contact me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, YouTube or SoundCloud, or just good old Messenger if they would like me to post them out a copy of my whole CD, which is aptly, but not originally I'm sure, named Table Coaster. I have assigned a price of £3.50 or whatever someone can afford, plus postage and packaging to my product. Table Coaster looks like a 7-track CD, but also includes another hidden track within, which is a particularly fun and unusual track. It is all written, played, performed and produced by me, aka Squidface Girl. It's not perfect, far from it, but time won't wait and it's good enough. Many thanks for taking time to consider my request to play the attached tune and for all of your support along the way on my ridiculously optimistic and important journey of self-discovery and development. I appreciate it all. Very best wishes, Suzanne Percy, Squidface Girl."
So those were this week's announcements, and now we're going to head over to the Rhylight Zone for the latest instalment of The Ranch, which is a short story by myself, Dane Cobain. Let's go.
One day, on that particular sweltering summer, the three of them were locked in the saddlery, like usual, while Bellina finished telling a story that was just The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, but with different names. She was sitting on a saddle, enjoying the sensation of the leather between her legs and pretending that she was riding the real thing. The door to the saddlery was on her left, while the ladder to the loft was to her right. Michael was sitting cross-legged on the floor at the foot of the ladder, idly tossing a 1,000 lire coin in the air and catching it again. Michaela was sitting in front of Bellina, twirling a lock of her hair around her index finger and staring open-mouthed at her as she continued the story. "And then the elves climbed onto their horses and rode out of the forest," Bellina was saying. "It was winter, and they knew that..." There was a loud bang, and Bellina saw the colour draining from Michaela's face at about the same time that Michael screamed. She whirled around to look in the direction that Michaela was looking, her eyes alighting on a metal filing cabinet that looked about as old as Grandpa Borgie. She'd peeked inside it a couple of summers ago and been disappointed to find that it was only being used to store empty Hessian sacks. When they'd entered the room, it had been standing up in its usual spot, the dust around it undisturbed due to the fact that it hadn't been used for a decade or more. But something had knocked it over, and Bellina knew instinctively that it hadn't been Michael or Michaela. The two of them hadn't moved, and nor had Bellina. "What just happened?" she asked. "You didn't see it?" "Of course I didn't see it, Michael," Bellina said. "I had my back to it, as you well know. So what happened?" "It just sort of fell," Michaela said. "I can't explain it. What do you think, Michael? You were closer to it." "I have no idea," Michael said, shaking his head. "One of the drawers opened, slowly at first. I thought it was maybe the wind, only..." "There's no wind in here," Bellina said, finishing the thought for him. "Sure, there are drafts here in the winter, but there's not even a breeze out there today, and the door's closed."
Exactly, Michael replied. Still, I saw the drawer opening and that's what caught my eye. Then nothing until all of a sudden it tipped over and smashed into the ground. That's when I screamed. And you swear you didn't touch it? I swear. I can back him up, Michaela added. I know I'm his twin, but I wouldn't lie for him. I was looking right at him when the cabinet tipped over. He didn't move a muscle. Okay, Bellina said. So what do we do? All three of them were staring at the filing cabinet, trying to figure out what had knocked it over, when it suddenly pirouetted on the floor at a 180, sending dust and straw flying through the air. With all of its drawers turned towards them, it was as though the thing was staring at them, daring them to inch closer. None of them said a word. They didn't need to. As one, they all turned and raced towards the door. Michaela got there first, but she struggled to slide the bolt back across so that she could swing the thing open. Michael was second, but he'd expected the door to be open when he arrived, and so he ended up slamming into the back of his sister, sending the two of them tumbling to the floor in a heap. In the end, it was Bellina who came to the rescue, grasping the bolt with shaking fingers and sliding it out, then yanking it half open, only for the heavy oak to collide with the two twins. Michael and Michaela crawled out of the way and Bellina took it again, pulled it open and sped outside into the daylight. The afternoon sun was so hot that it was almost oppressive, but Bellina was glad to feel the sunlight on her bare arms again. She turned to look back over her shoulder while the two Endrisi twins pushed past her. The filing cabinet was back where it had been when they'd first entered the room. The dust around it was undisturbed. It looked like it hadn't been moved for a decade or more. Managia, she murmured. Then she looked across at her two friends. Come on, you two, let's go check on the horses. But shouldn't we talk about what just happened? What is there to say? Bellina asked. There wasn't any wind in there, and that cabinet didn't fall over by itself. It would take all three of us to push it over. Can you explain it? No, the two twins said simultaneously, like the two of them often did. It was unnerving, but not as unnerving as what had happened inside the old saddlery. Bellina didn't sleep well that night, and nor did she sleep well the night after. Neither did Michaela, and Michael was so scared by what had happened that he wet the bed every night for the rest of the summer. That wasn't the only time that something strange happened in and around the saddlery either. A month or two after the cabinet fell over, the three kids were back at the saddlery, the nightmare almost forgotten. They rarely went inside, but the weather had cooled down, so they'd started sitting outside it in the shade when the sun had passed over to the other side. The games had changed, although the stories had stayed the same. Bellina had just finished telling the two twins a tale about an elven hunt in which the fair creatures had pursued wild boar on foot through the forest, though the hunts never ended with one of the beasts taking a spear through its side. The elves were custodians of nature, content to enjoy the thrill of the chase and then to leave their prey in peace so that they could dine on the many plants that grew in the glades. Michael was lying lazily on a bed of hay, which his parents had allowed the three kids to make on the condition that if the ranch's supplies ever ran low, the hay would be taken away again and used to feed the horses. He was staring at the sky with one hand above his eyes, watching the clouds as they passed above him, clearly in no rush to get from point A to point B. His sister, Michaela, was sitting on the saddlery's roof, her legs dangling over the eaves. It wasn't the tallest of buildings, but that still left her a good 15 feet in the air. The three of them had only recently discovered the route up to the top, which meant first climbing a tree and leaping across from its branches, then cresting another 4 feet or so where the flat roof rose up again to make space for the attic. Michaela was the only one of the three who was brave enough to climb up there. Bellina was looking at her, watching as she swung her bare legs backwards and forwards, when Michaela started screaming. "Amelia!" she bellowed, the colour draining from her face as she turned to look to her right. Bellina couldn't see what she was looking at, but she didn't need to. Amelia was the twins' little sister, a precocious 5-year-old girl who spent most of her time inside watching cartoons. She had never shown any interest in tagging along with her older siblings or of riding the horses. "Amelia!" Michaela cried again, a palpable fear in her voice. She sounded even more scared than she'd been when the filing cabinet had fallen over. "Amelia, get down from there! Get off the barn! You know you can't climb up here!" Bellina stood up, shaded her eyes and looked up at Michaela, straining to see what she was looking at. For a moment or two, she thought she could see the shape of a young girl, silhouetted against the sky, but the sun had peeked out from behind a cloud and its fierce light was burning her retina, filling her vision with dancing black spots. She thought that she saw Amelia there, or something that looked like Amelia, but she couldn't be sure. It could just as easily have been her brain playing tricks on her, trying to fill in the blanks in the distorted signal that it was receiving. That was the latest instalment of The Ranch by myself, Dane Cobain. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound, and this is San Dimas with You and I.
branches reached for the sky, while yours had touched it. We fed on dreams while the sun calmed our fears, and growing my roots far away, I crossed
That was Like a Tree by Betty Accorsi, and before that we had You and I by San Dimas. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to be joined in conversation now by this week's guest, who is Betty Accorsi.
It's a pretty unstructured conversation. I don't have a bunch of questions prepared or anything like that, so I will just let you talk about whatever you want to talk about and promote.
Okay, so I think important thing to say is that I recorded a new album in December,
Amazing.
and it will be released in July on the 18th. And it is single, so a song called Mary will be released on the 25th of April, together with the video and a little Kickstarter campaign to cover the cost of the CDs and the promotions. So I can send you the single if you want to put on radio after the release.
That would be awesome. Yeah, I mean, we can time it so we can try and maybe have this show the week after that.
Yeah, exactly. It would be nice. And yeah, I'm very excited because a lot of things are happened. And with Andrea, we played in France last week. So I try to expand and check also Europe, other countries, and see how my music goes in that part,
Amazing.
in other places.
Well, what can you tell us about the new album, like the recording process and things like that, and what's the kind of the instrumentation on it?
So the album was recorded at Perryvale Studios in South London, and so the instrumentation is similar to the one of my previous album, Green Roots. So we have me on saxophone, soprano saxophone and vocals, then Dan Houston on piano and trombone, then Andy Hamill on double bass and electric bass, and then we have Joe Edwards on drums. So new entry, and it's about the relationship between nature and art. So like how nature influences art, and so I choose for each song I choose something that can be related to nature and to art. So for example, Mary is inspired by the poetess Mary Oliver. So she wrote a lot of poems about nature. So I wrote a song about her. Then there is another song with the Queen, inspired by the Louis chess set, the piece of the Queen. And then One Into the Forest, inspired by Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare. So it's like this. I think it's very cool.
Yeah, for sure. And so you mentioned there are going to be you're running the Kickstarter for CDs. Do you have like different tiers available? Like what can people get from supporting on Kickstarter?
You can have the CDs, you can have the lesson with me, saxophone lesson with me. You can have the private gig with me and Andrea, if they are based in the UK, or online gig and stream. And they can have, I think I still have some tote bag that I
Can they have the quartet gig?
if they pay a lot,
Yeah,
they can have the quartet gig. Yeah.
cool. Awesome. And talking of gigs, where have you played over the last, because I mean, it's been a while since we've chatted. So where are some of the standout places you played over maybe the last year or so?
So we played at the Sismuth Jazz Festival, which was very, very cool, very nice. Then we played again at Pizza Express, but the Pheasantry section of Pizza Express. Then we played Amsterdam Jazz Club. We played Arundel Jailhouse on the coast. We played on Southend Jazz Center, very beautiful place. And where did we play? We played in France with Andrea, exactly. We played in Strasbourg. We had 3 gigs in Strasbourg. And we have one gig in Reykjavik in
Oh,
Iceland
nice. Yeah,
in May. Yeah. And yeah, and then we will have a gig on the 14th of June at Petersfield Blues Festival, Jazz and Blues Festival.
cool. And because I was going to ask, I mean, so you've got that gig at the jazz festival there. I mean, are you planning on going on the road and playing as much as you can to support the new album? What are
Yeah.
your plans to kind of promote it?
Yeah, I'm trying to find more gigs so to festivals and venues in the UK, maybe also like Manchester, Leeds, and Bristol, to try to explore, because now I played a lot in London and the South
Hmm.
Coast. I want to go a little up
Yeah.
see. Yeah, and have more fun, because I think it's always good to meet with the audience and speak about your project with them
Yeah.
instead of just using the social media. So it's a mixture of
Yeah.
everything.
Cool. And you mentioned so you've got one of the options on your Kickstarter is the lesson with you. I mean, is that something that you do provide in saxophone lessons?
Yeah, I'm a saxophone teacher, and I have my private students now of saxophone, clarinet, and piano.
Yeah.
And I love to teach saxophone. It's very fun for me.
Well, I was going to ask why do you, what would your your sell it how would you sell it to somebody that they should learn saxophone? What would you say to them?
Because it's a cool instrument, and if you like jazz or if you like any genre, because you could play with reggae, you can play with rock music. I think it's something that is special and is also original to have in a band.
Yeah.
So it's a good add to a
Cool.
band.
And I'm sure you're kind of mostly focusing on this current album, but I'm assuming there's going to be hopefully be another album in the future. And I know you've been inspired quite a bit about places out in nature. Are there any sort of big natural places that you're dying to visit?
So we are going to the Peak District in April,
Yeah.
and I am very happy because I like mountains,
Hmm.
and we live in Brighton, so we have the South Downs.
Yeah.
But I like when the hills are a little higher,
Hmm.
basically, and I like the forest, the woods. They relax me a lot.
Yeah. Well, and you've got Reykjavik coming up as well. So what have you got much planned while you're there? Is it going to be just focusing on the show, or are you going to hopefully do have a little holiday while you're out there?
Yeah, I think we will have a little short holiday and there, and then we'll play. I have this gig in a library that is very cool. It seems very cool. And then there is also a lighthouse where you can play. You don't have to book. You can just turn up, and the acoustic is very good. In Anka, what is good?
Akranes.
Akranes.
Akranes Lighthouse.
Cool.
Akranes Lighthouse. So it will be very fun.
Cool. Awesome. And I want to make sure that people know where to find specifically your Kickstarter, but you in general. So where can people follow you? Where can they pledge on the Kickstarter and get their hands on the album?
So they can find me on Instagram at bettyaccorsi.music, or TikTok, the same bettyaccorsi.music, or or Facebook, bettyaccorsi.music. And the website, it is bettyaccorsi.com, www.bettyaccorsi.com.
Cool. Cool. And while I've got you here, Andrea, question for you. Any news, any Vagult news?
Uh, Unfortunately not. Basically, I've pledged allegiance to Betty musically at the moment, and honestly, I'm finding a lot of satisfaction in just supporting her.
Yeah.
The way, like, I'm changing the way I play, and I'm changing the way I think about the music so that
Yeah.
I can kind of serve her project, and I find that very satisfying because rather than being a composer, I basically need to be an arranger. I need to play
Hmm.
like three instruments at once. And that was partly also the idea behind Virgil. So to kind of being a one-man band.
Yeah.
But in this case, I'm kind of like being one man jazz
Yeah.
trio.
You're one man backing band.
Yeah, basically. And it's working. I think it works a lot better. And yeah, as you heard, we're really exploring Europe, exploring the world, and I'm really looking forward to all of that.
Cool.
Big thank you to Betty Accorsi for catching up with us. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Betty Accorsi with Looking at the Horizon. that was Looking at the Horizon by Betty Accorsi. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us now to catch up with previous guest, Mark Armstrong Allard.
Is what's new with you since last time we spoke? So I think it's been probably about 4 years since we last spoke. So what have you been up to over the last 4 years or so?
So for me, I think last time we spoke, I was in the final stages of getting a book ready called Siegfried Dragonslayer.
Mm-hmm.
That got delayed due to COVID, and I know that was used as an excuse by a lot of people, but the illustrator that I was working with at the time was a single mother. So when homeschooling began for everyone during COVID, she really had to drop the illustration for the book and pick it up later on. So it ended up releasing in 2022. So Siegfried Dragonslayer was my personal reimagining and retelling of the Volsunga saga in graphic novel form, so turning it into a visual medium.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that I had no comprehension of is that it was going to be much longer than the original myth. The translation into English is normally around 80 to 90 pages.
Mm-hmm.
Just the first half of the myth, which is the first book, it ended up being, 146 pages long? So I've still got the second half to go. So it's going to be somewhere close to 300 pages all told.
Yeah.
But the first book came out in 2022. And for graphic novels, which normally print in the small press arena and medium publisher, like small to medium publisher arena, normally publish in the 1,000 to 2,000 print runs.
Mm-hmm.
Almost sold through that whole print run in the first year. So it did really well. Really happy with that. Beautiful artwork that really responded with people. The illustrator I worked with, Jasmine Redford, she actually painted the artwork with coffee. So it has this really beautiful copper tone that runs throughout the book. So that's been the big thing for me. But then over the past, 2.5, 3 years since that book came out, I've been working on the script slowly and over quite a long process for a new book that I'm working on, a new graphic novel. And that one doesn't have a title just yet, but it's based on Operation Oblivion. So this is a military operation that happened in Canadian history, but in conjunction with the British SOE during World War II, so the Special Operations Executive. And the reason it's taken so long for this script, normally I can knock out a script for something like Siegfried Dragonslayer, like a full graphic novel, in about 6 months. That's without having to do the research, but researching into the history necessary on a book about a military operation, especially one that was top secret, like Operation Oblivion, is incredibly difficult to do. I had to kind of dance around some rights issues with some of the like historical holdings of some of the data, because some of the rights were held by people that have died.
Yeah.
So I had to get in touch with descendants and ask for their permission, then go back to the people that held the actual archives, and then all of that kind of stuff. But it's essentially based on the history of 13 Chinese Canadian men against the backdrop of the Chinese Exclusion Act. So in Canada, we had a very similar exclusionary measure to what they had in the United States. In the United States, they had a quite racialized name for it called the Yellow Peril. In Canada, it followed something called the head tax, where Chinese Canadians at the time, in around about the turn of the century, so 1900, they would charge $500 to enter Canada. That is literally, you can pretty much times that by 100, so around about $1,000 today. When that didn't work, they moved on to the Chinese Exclusion Act. And so against that backdrop of a country that they were born into, so they were Canadians, but they were not allowed their Canadian citizenship, and they weren't allowed to enter professions such as law and stuff like that. And obviously preventing somebody from having citizenship prevents the right to vote. It prevents all those forms of political mobilization. And against that, they still decided that they were willing to fight and die for Canada in World War II. A Canadian man who spent most of his life in Hong Kong, called Francis Kendall. He preferred the name Mike. A bit of a weird story there. But he actually returned to Canada pretended to be a major in the Canadian Army, and I mean literally pretended to be a major under the direction of the British SOE, and they pretty much told him, if you get caught and captured in Canada because you're Canadian, you'll be subject to Canadian civil law, and we cannot help you.
Yeah.
They told him, go ahead and form this task force, because now that we've been forced out of Hong Kong, this was the British directive on this. Now we've been forced out of Hong Kong by the Japanese. We need people that look like they are local to the area to be in and to fight behind Japanese lines, to train up saboteurs, stuff like that. But their actions in World War II, in Operation Oblivion, behind enemy lines in Borneo, in the Sarawak, they inspired the end of the Chinese Exclusion Act, because one of the men who witnessed their training, General George Perks, went on to become Minister George Perks in B. Pearson's government that was formed after the war. And so, yeah, this is a story that I've worked with the Chinese Canadian Military Museum Society on. I'm working with a Chinese Canadian illustrator on it. So I'm really making sure that the sensitivity to the actual Greek is there. And it was a wonderful thing when I got brought into the fold on this, when I asked, can I make a story about this? I asked that to the Chinese Canadian Military Museum Society, mentioning that, you know, I'm a European guy, I'm white. And they said, it doesn't matter to us because this is a Canadian story. And it was at that moment that I knew that I was going to be okay in that group, that I was going to be accepted in that group, that I wasn't stepping on any toes, because this is about the unity of Canada. So I really, really, I felt really accepted in that moment, and it's just a beautiful process to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. And as you say, you've almost got two challenges there, because you've got kind of, again, the racial and cultural elements that you need to make sure that you get right, and the historical elements as well. And I suppose it's like an added challenge for something like a graphic novel, because if you were just writing straight fiction, you could get away with just saying, you know, the soldier lifted his rifle or whatever, and you wouldn't have that. You can get away, you can leave it to the imagination. You don't have to specify details, so you don't risk getting it wrong. Whereas in a visual medium, somebody can look at it and be like, they've drawn the wrong kind of rifle. So I suppose there's an extra amount of research. And then as well as yourself not being the illustrator, you also need to be that pair of eyes on it to make sure that the illustrator's done it right, and maybe brief them on being like, this is the kind of rifle you need to use, this is the kind of bags they wore, and all of this stuff. So it must be like a double challenge there.
Exactly, yeah. So I essentially have to make a toolkit for the illustrator of like, this is the kind of weaponry they would have had. This is what a radio in a household, because there's a scene where I have a not a ham radio, but like a transistor radio in a house that they're listening to the news on. So it's like, this is the kind of transistor radio that was available in Vancouver at the time.
Yeah.
It's literally everything like that. And then even talking on subjects like the different weaponry in Hong Kong that was available from the British SOE and the British at the time, compared to Canadian weaponry, compared to weaponry they would have been deployed with, because they were then deployed from Australia to Borneo.
Right, yeah.
Then it's Australian weaponry. So, yeah, it's all of this kind of stuff that has to go into it. And, yeah, you've got to be really careful getting the historicity of it correct.
Yeah, because someone will definitely point it out if you get it wrong as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So, and you mentioned that that's currently untitled, and I mean, I don't want to make you give me a hard and fast deadline or anything like that, but any idea when we can hopefully see that?
I'm hoping next year, 2026. I was hoping for 2025, but that is the goalposts have moved on that, unfortunately. But yeah, the illustrator that I work with also works in Vancouver, so that's what in Canada we call Hollywood North. That's where so many Hollywood productions take place now. So he actually works as an illustrator and animator in the animation world over in Vancouver. So there was that whole strike that was happening with the writers, all of that last year. Now they're playing catch up on all the productions. So now he's got all this work that he's having to catch up on, which has delayed the project a little bit. But yeah, 2026 is what we're looking at now.
Cool. And what about the next, the final part of Siegfried? Do you have a timeline in mind for that?
I wish I did this project about Chinese Canadians, about Operation Oblivion. That is that's kind of delayed that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping the following year, 2027, is
Yep.
when we'll be seen. So unfortunately, a bit of a gap from 2022 to 2027, but it's kind of been necessary to get this other project up and running and to get that out.
Yeah. And again, it's you you can't rush greatness, can you? You got to get it right, so it's worth the wait.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. But yeah, hopefully it's lives up to what the first book did. The first book got a wonderful response. I'm not somebody who takes compliments well.
Yeah.
I think that's the British part of me that has survived being Canadian. That survived assimilating to Canada. So when all these compliments came in about the first Siegfried, I wasn't really ready for that. So I just kind of faded back from the public life of that a little bit. But hopefully it lives up to that first book is what I'm aiming at saying there for sure.
Awesome. And just to end on, so where can people stay up to date with your various books and projects? Where's best for them to follow you?
So as well as doing the books, I do photography as well, and all of that, the photography, the books can all be found on markallardwill.com. There's no hyphen in there, so just markallardwill.com, and all of my socials are linked on there, and all the photography stuff is linked on there, and it's all just from there.
You're listening to the Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Bert Honor with Late Night Bitter Poem.
You stuck your tongue down an angel's throat. She still flies, but she cannot go back to that place she once called home. Looks like heaven's lost her soul because you could not keep control. For her the bell has truly tolled. You claim you're deadly under the sheets, but I know you're still a coward out in the streets. You act the big man, but the reality's you're weak. You must return from whence you came. Even angels tire from your sick game. I think we both know who's to blame. You might as well have clipped her wings, tossed her halo towards the bins. Oh, what an embarrassment of sin. Well, boy, you're heading for a fall. You'll pay your penance after all. The meek were silent, but now the damned have got their call. When the day breaks, that's when the heart aches. You stuck your tongue down an angel's throat. She still flies, but she cannot go back to that place she once called home. Now I don't believe in divinity, but if your fate were up to me, well, then I'll see you in the fire.
You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to head over to the Ilk Shed now to catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review.
Suzi Quatro's Greatest Hits, an album I got for £2.50 from Collector's Paradise while I was looking for glam rock albums. Suzi Quatro was my and every other early 70s schoolboy's sexual fantasy. A diminutive, sexy, sassy American bass player. She wore leather and played the part of a character called Leather Toscadero in Happy Days. I was most inspired by the size of her husband, who was also the guitarist in the band. Named Len Tucky, by the standards of the day he was considered fat, as was I. I can remember knowing about Suzi Quatro when she was still playing in bands in Detroit. She came to England and became part of the same stable as Sweet and Mud, churning out glam rock classics written and produced by Chin and Chapman. Simple, catchy rock and roll with almost a retro feel. Uncluttered mixes of dum-da-dum bass, tribal shuffling tom-tom heavy drums, and much shouting of haze and yeahs, all with some Jerry Lee Little Richard Barrelhouse piano with blues licks and glissandos. The sound of good times and parties, a sound like the Beatles, Zepp, Floyd and Sabs had never happened. Mindless lyrics you didn't mind getting stuck in your mind. Songs like Can the Can, 48 Crash, Devilgate Drive and Daytona Demon, all of which are on this LP, along with the slightly less energetic She's in Love with You and If You Can't Give Me Love. There is one track that is actually credited to Quatro and Tucky. I saw Suzi Quatro a few years after her heyday playing the Canteen in Brunel University, the same place I saw Thin Lizzy just before they broke big, and a stage my band later performed on. The Quatro band did not disappoint. They were not yet a nostalgia act, and they still rocked, and Len Tucky was still fat. This album goes from status quo type guitar boogie to glossy MOR pop. I don't know if she is still American, but she is a British national treasure, and she is maybe one reason for all the female bass players that have followed in her wake. Suzi Quatro, Greatest Hits.
Big thank you to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review. Thank you to Betty Accorsi and for Mark Armstrong Allard for joining me. As always, you can reach out to me here at the studio. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. We are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please do leave us a short review on your podcast platform of choice. It all helps. You can find us on Facebook if you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, and you can reach out to me here at the studio on dane.cobain at wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain at wickhamsound.org.uk. I'm particularly keen to hear from poets, performers, musicians, people with MP3s, local arts news, potential guests, and anybody who would like to be featured in the news section. So I'm going to leave you with one last tune, and this is Occasionally David with Agatha Christie. I'll catch you next week.
Agatha Christie came to tea. When she knocked on the door and asked for me. When she